Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers Podcast, episode 125. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, sci-fi, memoir and picture book writer, voracious reader of many genres, your founder and co-host, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country.
And I'm Laurie Bell, science fiction and fantasy author, blogger, short story, flash fiction writer, and your co-host today, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and would like to be a more voracious reader. And that has slipped away this year because I've been editing madly. So that's my goal for the next couple of weeks. Read.
Excellent.
Definitely.
Get your brain full again for Christmas. And
Yes.
Talking about full, we are not going to faff about today. We are going to go straight to a fabulous interview that the delightful Darren Kasenkow.
Yes, he's back.
He's back briefly for a star appearance, and he's interviewing the absolutely fascinating writer Damien Linnane. I think we just go straight
jump straight in.
Interview.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been quite a little bit of time between lizard drinks, as they say, but I would like to let you all know that my very next guest, and my very special guest for many reasons, holds a master's degree in information studies and lobbies for better educational programs and mental health support for incarcerated people. Now, when it comes to advocating for what are not only fundamental needs, but I believe also clear human-based rights, perhaps nobody is in a better position to advocate than my special guest. And the reason I'm telling you all that is that these are things you're going to learn a lot about, but that is just scratching the surface of many fundamental and wonderful aspects of this gentleman, who is not only a self-taught, or should I say taught himself the art of writing while incarcerated, but also penned his debut thriller novel Scarred in the old-fashioned way, which is something or a great respect to my hat, by pen and hand, which is something I used to write way back in the day. Now, my next guest specialises also in photorealistic drawings using graphite. He is the editor of a magazine called Paper Chained, which is an art and writing publication for prisoners. And obviously, I've got the absolute pleasure of talking with him this evening about his new biography called Raw. My guest is a veteran guest, so to speak, of so many author interviews that I'm actually going to be second guessing a lot of my questions that I'm going to be asking, with the fear that I'm probably asking something that's been asked already a million times. He's also a man with a movement-inspired workload that pretty much makes me feel like I'm still in my pajamas waiting for the kettle to boil. But shall I say, Damien Linnane, I hope I've pronounced your surname right. Damien, welcome to the show.
No, thank you. It's great to be here. And yet, yes, that's pronounced right. Yeah.
Excellent. As you can see, it's been a while since I've done an interview, so my prep was a little bit out there. I should have asked that at the start, but woohoo, good guess on my behalf. So we're off to a good start. Now, before we jump any further, Damien, I'd just love for you to take this opportunity to introduce yourself to, obviously, our wonderful ABL listeners, and look, maybe give a snapshot of what's happening right now in the world of Damien Linnane, which will give us a little bit of a context as we go back in time, obviously when we talk about some of the aspects of your earlier works and your current biography. But yeah, maybe just introduction to yourself and some of the cool things that are happening in your life right now.
Yeah, so I'm glad you gave me that kind of long introduction, because sometimes I'm like, oh, how do I describe myself? Because I wear so many hats. But
definitely.
Yeah, so I'm Damien. I'm an author, illustrator, magazine editor, and I'm also a PhD candidate at the moment. And so those are probably my job titles. Or so what am I doing at the moment? So I'm always editing the magazine Paper Chain, which you mentioned. That's like a day job. I'm also I'm currently working on an illustration contract for a podcast in the US called Ear Hustle, and I'm doing as well as my PhD, I'm doing a lot of advocacy at the moment to try and make Medicare available in prisons. Very few people know that there's no Medicare access in prisons, and because there's no Medicare access, a lot of types of healthcare and a lot of medications aren't available to people in prison. And my motivation for that is my personal experience of being denied any form of mental health treatment or treatment for a disability while I was in custody myself. So that probably gives you a few talking points to go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for a start, the Medicare aspect is something that, one, I would never heard about or aware of, and obviously probably not something that in my personal experience I've come across. I was always under the impression that would be a standard feature of finding yourself, in the prison system, being that, you're under the government, well, for want of a better word, care, or should I say custody, obviously, but, they are responsible for you during that period. How does it, from your experience and as someone who's an advocate for that, you're probably, in a better position than almost anyone to discuss what you've already looked into and some of the more legalities and intricacies of it. How does a government, A, be responsible for you, but B, at the same time, deny you something that is really a responsibility requirement of a government? Yeah,
so I mean, there's definitely this general opinion amongst the public that prisons are like rehabilitating people, and I can assure you that's not the case at all. But the Medicare thing, that was actually basically government departments trying to avoid paying for things. So like 60-second history on Medicare. Medicare was brought out by Gough Whitlam. Every single conservative, like Liberal and Country Party was a precursor to the National. So every single conservative politician voted against it. Like the Liberal Party was like, free healthcare for poor people. You have got to be insane. They lobbied against it for years, but Gough Whitlam brought it out. And then, of course, we had the transition of power when Whitlam was shafted. And the Conservatives came in, and the first thing they wanted to do was get rid of Medicare, but it was too popular. So what they did was they tried to gut it as much as possible, and they brought in some new legislation removing Medicare access from anyone who was having their healthcare provided by the state, which included prisons. And so prisoners have really never had access to Medicare. And like 47 years ago when this happened, it wasn't really a big deal in the sense that it wasn't done as a punitive thing. It was basically the federal government didn't want to pay for a lot of things, so they tried to force the state government to pay for it. But many years later, our entire healthcare system revolves around Medicare, and almost pretty much it's supposedly universal healthcare, and pretty much everyone has access to it except prisoners. And because of that, the reality of the situation is the amount of money that the state governments have to fund healthcare in prison, it just isn't enough to afford certain services without Medicare rebates, and also certain PBS prescriptions. So that's probably the bigger issue, is that in the community, like for example, like one type of medication, like biologics for dermatological issues. On PBS, it's like a few $100s a year. Without PBS, it's about $40,000 a year.
That's incredible.
And prisons don't have the budget for that. So if you're in prison, you just don't get that medication, and that goes for a lot of things. And because improving the rights of prisoners isn't a vote-winning issue, it's just something that politicians generally don't touch. Yeah.
On one hand, I understand that part that you just finished with there, that a lot of people don't feel it's at the top of their priority list because it may not be a part of their world. But ironically, and not to step into that world of politics, we're here to talk about books. But while we're on the subject of Medicare, it's odd that we've got supposed high-paid individuals, which I think they should be in theory, when their role and their very job description is to manage the economy or different facets of the federal government applications and all the stuff like Medicare, etc. At what point does somebody not sit there and say, okay, well, let's put off their medical needs while in a position where they have to serve a custodial sentence for whatever those reasons might be, and therefore potentially double, triple or quadruple their medical requirements once they get out, which in essence is a higher financial burden. So it always makes me sort of sit back and shake my head in those instances, and this is a great example of it, where whatever justification they have still does not justify based on their very principled platform, which should be that financial management.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, every now and then, you'll hear someone say, "Oh, why should we be spending the money on prisoners?" And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's costing taxpayers an absolute fortune to not provide these services because medical conditions are deteriorating in there, and then people are getting out. The average prison sentence is 14 months. There are very, very few Ivan Milats who will never be released, kind of thing. And so 99% of people will get out. When they get out, their health has deteriorated, and now not only is it more expensive, they're essentially putting more burden on the public health system. So we've actually got the economic modelling. We know it would save taxpayers a fortune to provide these services in prison, but it's just it's just not a popular argument, so which is one of the reasons it hasn't happened. But it would actually save taxpayers a lot of money if we were able to treat certain conditions, and also it's just the prison is actually the perfect place to kind of diagnose conditions and then treat them. And it's really mind-boggling that doesn't happen. People are there, they're literally like captive audience. You've that there's not much else to do. You could be running all kinds of assessments. There's so much undiagnosed mental health issues in prison, everything from ADHD to fetal alcohol syndrome, all these conditions that are undiagnosed and unmanaged, and probably have a lot to do with why the person committed a crime in the first place. And these we could be using prisons as a way to diagnose and treat these conditions, but essentially they're just holding pens. Wait here, and your mental health is going to deteriorate, and then one day we open the door and push you out with very little support. There was actually in the Northern Territory, there's a Aboriginal healthcare provider called Danila Dilba, and they provide the healthcare at Dondale, that notorious prison, youth prison in there, and they've been complaining for a long time that they want to try and diagnose kids in custody with fetal alcohol syndrome, but there's no non-Medicare service for that, and prisoners, including children in prison, don't have access to Medicare either, so they just simply cannot be diagnosed with this this condition, which and it's recognized that treating that condition would help prevent crime. So why aren't we finding out? It's just completely mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think that's the number one description, isn't it? Mind-boggling. It definitely, boggles the mind, but it's just another facet of this world that sometimes makes reality, should I say, look upside down. Do you think, without foreshadowing a lot of what I hope to chat with you about, moving forward in a conversation, do you think that this is a systemic issue that arises from the sense of somebody's voice being silenced while being incarcerated? And when I say silenced, I mean in the sense of not only an individual's voice, but also the ability for anyone to discuss what happens, because it's the spotlight is removed, and therefore there's this, I guess, for want of a better word, a void where society doesn't have to worry what's happening over there. And do you think that this is something that maybe inspired you to? Well, no, we won't jump into what inspired you to write shit. But do you think that it's a systemic feature of not having a voice as a member of society who is for the moment silenced while incarcerated?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm doing my PhD at the Centre for Law and Social Justice at the University of Newcastle, and when that was opened, the Governor of New South Wales, Margaret Beasley, who incidentally opened my last art exhibition, but she came to open the law school as well, and so did Sharon Clayton, who was the federal member for Newcastle. And while they were there, I hadn't met either of them at the time, but I went up and introduced myself, and I said, I'm a big part of my PhD focus at the time was trying to make Medicare available in prison. I've kind of separated that a bit from my PhD now, but I mentioned that to both of them, and both of them said the exact same thing. They're like, what do you mean there's no Medicare in prison? Which is nothing against either of them. That's how like poorly known this issue is. And but you have to remember, like, our prison system, you could argue that it's working entirely as it was designed to, and that was that it was designed to put the criminal issue out of sight, out of mind. Back in the day, we had public floggings and things, and the reason why that stopped and prisons began is because it was becoming distasteful to flog people in public. So they wanted to things out of sight, out of mind, and you absolutely don't have a voice in prison. It's so hard to maintain contact with people, and also. It's actually illegal to do a interview. If you're a journalist, it's illegal to interview a prisoner without prior approval, which almost will never be granted. And so you're literally without a voice. In some aspects, like you can't talk to the media about what's happening, and it's just really hard to have a voice at all, which is definitely had a lot to do with why I got involved with Paper Chain, the prison magazine. I'm the editor of, but I went into the prison system. I went in with a really good attitude. I was like, I'm going to get therapy, and I'm going to work on myself, and I'm going to go back to university. And I very quickly found out that the prison didn't have the resources for me to study at university, so that wasn't an option. And then I had a mandatory appointment with a prison psychologist, and I told her that I was getting therapy before I went into prison. I was on a mental health care plan, and I'd found it really beneficial. And I said to her, I'm like, I think it'd be really beneficial for me and society in general if I'm able to keep, working, getting therapy while I'm in custody. Mm-hmm. And she smiled sadly, and she said, Damien, everyone in prison would benefit from therapy, but there's no funding for that. See, there are lots of not lots, but there are psychologists working in prison, and that gives people the false impression that they're providing therapy, but they're not. Psychologists in prison, more often than not, they're hired by corrections to write reports for probation and parole and to do assessments, so they don't actually help people. And I was really confused by a whole sentence. Like, I'm like, how can I not get a mental health care plan? And I ended up writing a letter to the Minister for Corrections in New South Wales at the time, and I said, like, this is crazy. Why can't I just continue on the mental health care plan I was on in the community? And his response to that was terse. He just said, the mental health care plan is provided through Medicare, and prisoners lose their Medicare access. And I wrote that letter to him a couple of weeks before I got out, so I didn't get his reply, understandably, until after I was released. And so it wasn't until after I was released that I found out that I'd lost my Medicare access. I spent the whole sentence wondering why healthcare was so dreadful, and I didn't understand until after I got out. But point being, so I went in there, I wanted therapy, and I wanted to go back to uni, and I couldn't do anything. Couldn't do those. There was nothing constructive to do. And I was so I turned to art and writing. I turned to writing first, and I wrote the novel, and then I wrote a couple of short stories, and that was all well and good, but there was no way for me to share anything I was making with the world. I had no way to, even if I wanted to send a copy to a friend, I had to write it out myself, and then physically mail it to them. Which is really inefficient, but so I got involved with Paper Chain because I wanted to give prisoners a way to express themselves, getting back to that lack of a voice thing. But but yeah, probably opened up a few doors for you to ask another question from there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And but you raised a really good point in that when you mentioned that, this general, I guess, concept of incarceration stemming from this original need to punish and, originally designed for flogging, so to speak, to use a blanket term. And I think that goes somewhat to why the silencing of incarcerated voices and perhaps the inability of society to spotlight or offer a voice to those incarcerated because of that emotional, perhaps, it's obviously a false emotional position that, society in general probably has taken for a long time, in that if a prisoner is incarcerated, if they probably deserve some form of punishment, they're in there for a particular reason. That's a crime against society in general. So we obviously, it's easy to just think, oh well, then they're there to be punished, and therefore of course they don't get the rights of everyone else. They gave up those rights when they chose to do X, Y and Z. However, especially as we're moving into this technological age where we can really explore what it means to be human. Of course, one thing we're slowly bringing to the surface is everyone has a story, and the story to get wherever we are is so different for everybody on an individual level. And there are so many different pathways to find oneself incarcerated. And I'm sure there's people that do need to be removed and maybe don't deserve the right to be back as part of a free society. That's obviously a different debate, but the fact is that the reason for so many people to be there are so varied that it is a crime in itself not to at least recognise that and be allowed to explore some of those reasons. Because I think if that was the case, if we were all more aware, if we were hyper aware, or at least had the ability to delve into it a little bit more about what leads some people to be in the position where they make a decision, or they're in circumstances that lead to incarceration, our knee-jerk reaction to, oh well, that's just the way it goes, might be a little bit different. And stories is obviously what we're here to talk about, writing and biographies and short stories and thrillers and all those sorts of things. But fundamentally, stories are probably never more important than something when we're talking about a reason for somebody to find themselves incarcerated.
Yeah, well, that's I think one of the problems. There's many problems with our criminal justice system, but one of the problem is, they ask you, what did you do? Are you guilty of this? All right, well, we're going to convict you. That they don't ask what made you this way, And when I was much younger, I like a lot of people, I looked down my nose at drug addicts. I'm like, oh, why you want to be like that? Oh, look at these junkies, kind of thing. And it wasn't until I was much older that I found out that 86% of intravenous drug users were sexually assaulted as a child. They're taking, they're getting addicted to heroin because it's how they cope with the pain. It's not a good way of coping with the pain, but it's how they cope. And then obviously, if you get a drug addiction, now you need to fund that, and so you're committing burglaries or whatever. But just as a society, we're so focused on just punishing people, give them their comeuppance, you did this, so we're going to punish you, and I'm not saying people don't deserve to be punished, but we should be addressing the cause of offences as well. We should be looking at things differently. I think drugs, for example, something I never got into, but I see it as a health issue and not a criminal issue. I just think we've just a lot, just a problem in society in general. We do it like this because we've always done it this way, and I think things are slowly changing in the right direction, but we've definitely got a long way to go to to actually address the causes of offending rather than just locking people up and that's another thing. We know for a fact, all the evidence proves that tough on crime policies don't reduce crime. You can't imprison your way out of a crime wave. We know for a fact that these policies don't work, but for some reason they're really popular with the public. because we're so hung up on this vengeance, aspect. And so even though like criminologists and sociologists and anyone who actually works in the industry, we all know that these policies don't work, but we're like, they're such vote winners, and they're so popular with politicians who just want to appeal to what's popular. And it's where do you start, really? Where do you start trying to fix this problem? I'm not really sure, but there's definitely a lot of problems that we need to work on.
Oh, look, 100%, and it's very easy in so many different aspects of life to sort of point out problems without offering solutions, or at least discussing where those solutions can be found. Personally, I think as we're leading forward in discussion, I think story is a really good place to start. I think when it comes to crime and sentencing and the reasons for being there, for many of us, the focus is on the destination, the ultimate destination, which is, you found yourself in court or you found yourself in jail. We don't want to discuss the journey because a lot of us don't have time. So we just rely on different, functional compartments of society to worry about that, and we assume that they're doing that in a responsible manner. So, the destination is only the tip of the iceberg of how someone gets there. And it's funny, you raise a really good point, this tough on crime. I always wonder, we're definitely getting to a point now where our trust in mainstream media maybe is slowly being eroded for correct reasons, at least in the last a decade or so, in the sense that they're probably, rather than reflecting what society's feeling, they're trying to guide how society feels, and that's becoming a lot more obvious. So, for example, tough on crime, sure, that's always been a thing of, everyone wants, tough on crime. That may be the case to a certain degree, but I think, in reality, it could be said that people want to be tough on crime, except for the following caveats. A, if it's you, a victim who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, which is, the law is a very, very big pond. It's very easy to get your toes wet, even if you don't mean to. And B, if it's someone someone you love, a friend or colleague. So tough on crime, unless has in any respect has a personal relationship to yourself, or the world around you, which kind of makes the whole concept of tough on crime null and void. And before we, to sort of ease our way past this one, because I know it's a whole different realm of conversation and discussion, but one thing that I've always found, really fascinating and was a big eye-opener for me, and something that everyone can do. So anyone who's listening now who thinks, well, it's a dark spot in society that I can't have access to, I can't see, I'm not going to be incarcerated, I'm not in the courtrooms, and all those sorts of reasons that we might offer to be ignorant, voluntarily or not. At least in South Australia, you've got the court sentencing remarks, and it's something that I've been reading for years now. Hand on heart novels. I've used it as a little distraction for a lot of different times I've been working in offices. But look, at the end of the day, you can read not only a person's crime, but you can read a decision by a judge for the particular sentence someone's arrived at. The big eye-opener there is the majority of a sentencing remark is the road to how that individual's reach that position where they're being sentenced. And it is an eye-opener in the sense that there's just no common way of getting to what is a common scenario. That is, you're guilty of XYZ crime, but you can read 100 cases where someone's convicted of the same crime and not one person's journey is the same. And, take 5-10 minutes to read it. Sometimes you'll be, okay, that person probably hasn't learnt their lesson. But then really the majority of the time you think, wow, that, there by the grace of God go I, in the sense of I'm only one or two mistakes from being in that exact same position. And I think that's something, and I'm sure you're aware more than most people doing your PhD and being, being so passionate and an advocate for all these different aspects of the legal system on both, the right side and the wrong side, so to speak, that ability to read people's stories and start to get a grasp and idea of how you get there. I think that's a big way to slowly implement change.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a big part of my memoir, I really feel like my memoir, it's entertaining for anyone. That I get good feedback on it, and I think anyone can pick it up and enjoy it. something that I was like, really trying to like, the underlying messages in there was one thing was that my life didn't actually start to get better until I started talking about what happened to me, and essentially why I committed the crime, because I was sexually assaulted as a child, and when I told my father and stepmother about it, they didn't believe me. And it actually took a very long time. It wasn't until I started to get therapy that I realized that my trauma came less from being abused and more from not being believed, because the abuse was, and take this with a grain of salt, for lack of a better word, in relatively speaking, in terms of abuse, it was somewhat mild, but the pain came from not being believed. And then I like tried to, because they didn't believe me, I just tried to bury the trauma for 20 years. And if there's one, if you only take one thing out of this podcast, I want it to be the following, is that you can't bury trauma indefinitely. It's going to come up. And that's what happened. Fast forward 20 years later, this is oversimplified, but someone very close to me told me that she had also been a victim of sexual assault, and that dragged up all these feelings that I'd been trying to bury. And but that's the thing, like I when I had the media coverage of the crime, the media, they want to sell newspapers, so they I remember I had my forensic like psychiatric assessment, or my it was either that or the my pre-sentencing report. Anyway, one of them was pointed out that they said I over the course of my life I had had homicidal thoughts towards pedophiles. And I'm like, well, okay, yep, sure, true. I think a lot of people do. And then another thing they pointed out was that I had no remorse towards the person I was targeting. So by the way, I should probably fill in the blanks. So I, after that person told me that she had been sexually assaulted, I set fire to the home of the man she said abused her. The entire house burnt down. No one was injured. But the report also it said that I had no remorse to that person, which, to be honest, I don't. I regret certain things. But I feel no remorse towards that person. And I think the newspaper, they one of their headlines was just arsonist has no remorse. That was the headline, and then it just kind of painted me as this,
dear,
psychopath. Like a man who suffers from homicidal ideation appeared in court today, and it's just like wow, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. No context, didn't even mention why I'd done it, which that part was understandable. They were probably worried about getting sued because the person who was told did this, he was never convicted, which was partially why I took the law into my own hands. But nobody they didn't go into why I'd done it. And so back with the memoir, I guess I was trying to one of the messages is it wasn't until I started getting therapy and I actually stopped trying to bury what had happened and started talking about it and opening up, that was when my quality of life started to improve, and that's what I attribute a lot of my success to today.
Excellent. Well, you've definitely preempted a lot of questions, so let's perhaps take our listeners back a little bit, and let's not go from the beginning, because obviously that's a long way away. But what I mean is let's talk about why you're here, and that is the book and the world of writing that's led you here, or at least part of the journey that's been established by writing. And you talked about obviously some elements of your biography and elements of your personal life that has been a catalyst for where we are today, and with regards to the media, like you said, it's that's a whole different element as well that I'm looking forward to discuss, because the media, wow, manipulating people, that's unheard of, isn't it, through things. But look, what I'd like to do then is perhaps let's start with the fact that you are quote unquote a self-taught artist and author, visual artist and author, and as you mentioned that a lot of that came while incarcerated. So let's talk about this art of writing. That's what and the book and the stuff that all our ABL listeners are probably dying to hear about. So the first question that comes to mind is, what came first as far as rising to the surface when you started exploring these two different sort of approaches? Was it the visual art that started to surface and that led to writing, or was it the writing that came from visual art? Which one, or were they both equal? So maybe just give us an idea of, because you did talk about how, trauma, you can't bury it, and I think, perhaps, to use an analogy of a garden, there's certain seeds that grow. You plant these seeds, and you never know what fruits are going to come, and that's an important part of any footsteps we place in life. So as far as the seeds and the footsteps, what came first for you as an individual, regardless of your surroundings at the time? Do you think it was this desire, was there a passion that came from the moment you started doing visual art stuff, graphic pencil design and reflections of reality in that respect, or was it when you started popping words on page, and was there something that was there before, since you were a kid, that maybe popped up again? Was there a seed even earlier back in time?
I've always been a prolific reader. In fact, like in primary school and early high school, like I was always getting in trouble in class for trying to read a book under my desk and hide it, and failing miserably.
Excellent, yes.
Yeah. And so I've always been a prolific reader. I'd never really written much before, and then I went in, and like I said, I wanted therapy to work on myself, and I wanted to go back to uni, and those options weren't available, and that was when I started panicking. Because my friends had asked me, like, "Oh, Damien, you're going to jail? Are you freaking out?" And I was like, and I'm ex-military. I was like, and I don't, at the risk of sounding full of myself, I was like, "Oh, no, I'm tough. I can handle it." And I very much thought that at the time, and but then I found out that I couldn't do anything. That they had nothing for me to do, and that's when I started panicking, because I'd always kind of like distracted myself by keeping myself really busy. That was one of the ways I didn't deal with the trauma.
Yeah, and that is a terrifying thought, isn't it?
And I couldn't deal with the trauma in there anyway, because there was no therapy. So I'm like, I needed something to distract myself. And I've always been a daydreamer, and I used to spend a lot of time like daydreaming, because I'm also like, really love cinema as well. And I always used to like picture like this opening scene of a movie, which ended up being the first chapter of my novel that I wrote in prison, Scarred. But so I used to daydream about that a lot. And then, I was in prison, and I'm like, well, what can I do? I've got nothing. I've got they let us go to the library every weekday, and don't ask me how they figured out this allocation, but every prisoner was entitled to 3 pieces of paper a day. And so I went, so I went to the library and I got my 3 pieces of paper, and then I'm back in my cell, and we're locked in our cells for 16 hours a day, and that's on a good day. Quite often we'd have lockdown and they wouldn't let us out at all, but I'm in cell for 16 hours a day, and all I've got is this pen and paper. And I'd always daydreamed about this opening scene of a movie, but I couldn't direct a movie in prison. So I started writing it, and so I started writing down, just out of desperation. I'm like, well, what else can I do? I'll write something. And so I started writing it, and I read over it, and like I said, I've been reading prolifically since I was a kid. So at the risk of sounding full of myself, I read back over this chapter I'd written, or this short story really, and I was like, hey, this is actually, I think this is good. And so I'm like, well, maybe I'll continue working on this tomorrow when I'm able to go back to the library and get another 3 pieces of paper.
But you said, sorry to interrupt, you said something that I think is really important there. I know back in a lot of interviews we've talked a lot about the imposter syndrome, and you said, with at the risk of sounding full of yourself, I don't think it's full of yourself at all. I think, could you imagine if you hated what you wrote? We wouldn't be talking. And
exactly.
I think, for everyone out there, like, you got to look for the good, even though, with hindsight, all of us might look back and go, oh, I could have done this better or that better. But at the time, you got to love what you're doing. And so I'm sure that, I don't think it's full of yourself at all. I think, thank God you did. We were happy with what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so essentially, I turned to writing, I guess, out of desperation, because I needed something to do, and I loved it. Like I, was probably one of the few people who couldn't actually wait to get locked back in after they let us out into the yard and stuff, because I wanted to write, and so it was my escape. I escaped from prison by going into this fantasy world every day, and like often eventually I got moved from the first prison, as is customary, and they sent me to a working prison, and so I'd be working there during the day, and I'd just be daydreaming about what I was going to write, and then I'd get back to my room, my cell, and sometimes like what I'd be daydreaming about like all day, I just start writing the next chapter, and I'm like, oh no, that's not how it goes at all, and no, it's going differently. Like at the people often ask me, like, did you map the whole book out? I'm like, no, not even a little bit. Like I just sat down and I wrote, and the book kind of wrote itself. At no point did I know what was going to happen more than 3 chapters in advance. At one point I did write myself into a corner, and then I had to go back a bit and readjust things. But it was basically, it was my mental health support. 3 things got me through my sentence. The first thing was reading. I still read prolifically. I read 63 books while I was in. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Including I don't know why, just so I could say I read it. I read the entire Bible. Not recommended. It's very dry, and no offense to religious people, but I read a lot of books, and so that was something I did. Like, reading was something I did during the whole sentence. But then I spent it took me 5 months to write the crime novel by hand. And, every now and then people ask me, like, oh, wow, it took me like 4 years to write my crime novel. Like, my novel. Like, how did you write it in 5 months? And my response to that was, like, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish when there aren't many, distractions. So, in fact, I needed to create the distraction to escape from prison. But after 5 months, I'd finished writing it, and I consider myself a non-fiction writer now, but you can't really write non-fiction in prison because you can't do research. We had an encyclopedia set in the prison library. It was printed in 1964. You can't Google things. I use the term prison library really loosely. Typically it's like 4 shelves of books, which are all very outdated, and a lot have got pages ripped out because
so a garage sale, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And so, but I spent 5 months writing this book, and then after that I was like, I started having a bit of a freak out again, because I'm like, well, what am I going to do now? Because I didn't have a idea for another fiction book, and to be honest, I still don't. And I turned to, I had this one idea in my head and I got it out, and now I consider myself a non-fiction writer. But so I was like, what am I going to do now? And I was having a little bit of a freak out, and a guy in my cell block, it's actually kind of funny. This part isn't funny, but yeah, he was in for drink driving, but his job before that was, he was a firefighter, and everybody thought it was hilarious that we got along so well, because he was a firefighter and I was technically in for arson.
Okay, yes, boom, boom, yes.
Yeah, he actually, he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I finished my novel last night. And he's like, isn't that a good thing? I'm like, well, yeah, but what am I going to do now? And he said, oh, have you ever given drawing a go? And when I was in primary school, like, people used to compliment me as a drawer, but I literally cannot remember drawing anything between high school starting and prison. I think it was just something I grew out of. And I was like, oh, well, not since primary school. And he's like, oh, I'm not sure if he was actually like, thought I was suited to it, or if he was just trying to like be nice and give me something to do. He's like, I'll give you my old sketch pad. And I'm like, well, what am I going to draw? I don't know what to do. And so I just started, you can order, there's a very limited list of magazines and newspapers that you can order in prison. And so I started like going through one of the magazines that was in the common area of the wing. And I found just a face, and I was like, okay, I'll draw that. And then after I was done, I was like, if anyone saw that, I actually ended up giving that first drawing to the firefighter. But yeah, if anyone saw that now, I'd probably be embarrassed. But at the time, for someone who hadn't drawn anything for well over a decade, I was like, hey, that's not bad. And so after that, drawing every day replaced writing as my escape, just because I didn't know what else to write. So I never thought I'd be a writer or an artist, and now I'm both. I never imagined I'd illustrate a book for Penguin Random House, which I did a few years ago, and have art exhibitions all over, and have a second book coming out, let alone a first one. But overall, I actually look at often, like, people say to me, they're like, oh, Damien, I'm really sorry that happened to you and you went to prison. And I'm like, oh, the bad things happen in prison by all means. Like, I saw things that needed fixing, and which I'm trying to fix now, but like the Medicare issue. But overall, I actually look at prison as one of the most productive and like happier times of my life, because I accomplished so much. And part of the reason I committed the crime in the first place, I was dealing with trauma. But part of the reason I committed the crime was because my life was going really badly, and I didn't really feel like I had anything left to lose, really. I was like, who cares if I go to prison? Life's going really badly. And whereas I found all these this passion in prison, and now life's going very well. And so I overall it was a very positive experience. Yeah.
Well, I think that's very stoic, position to take, from a philosophical perspective, because I think, that whole idea of, sometimes we can't be in control of certain elements of the world, but we can certainly try and learn how to control our reaction to those elements, and to reach a point where you can take something that is realistically a negative experience. I can't imagine it being anything but to begin with, and turn it into something that is so profound and now an amazing and positive feature of who you are is just awesome. And I think it's a beautiful thing to hear you say how, not to say that it was a beautiful thing that you needed to escape, but it's beautiful to hear you talk about how the writing was such a wonderful escape for you, because there's this treasure that you've discovered that transcends everything while you're there. And it goes to what I think is such a beautiful and cool thing about writing, and that is, it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. If you can get literally a pen to paper, you can dive into this absolute joy, and you don't even need pen and paper. Like you said, you can be doing something else, like working, whatever, and plotting out or thinking about, and building up that hunger to get that pen. So I think that's a beautiful sentiment to have, that you can find that beautiful escape in something that you love. And what I'd really like to know is, I'm a big film lover as well, and you talked about how the whole idea of opening of a movie. So before we jump into your biography raw, we are quickly talking about, obviously, your very first novel, which is a thriller called Scarred. I would love to know, way back before whatever changes took place, or if any took place, what was the opening scene in your mind that was obviously pretty cool enough that you decided, I want to write this? So guide me through it. What was in your head? What was the camera? What was the action? What was the music? What was it all about, this opening scene that really had you?
You know what? I've mentioned it like a few times that I had this opening scene in my head. No one's actually asked what it was before, so that's a new one. But
good. That's I think a really important one, isn't it?
Yeah. But all my life, because I never got any justice for what happened to me as a child, I had this huge chip on my shoulder. I was really angry with the world, and and I wanted to equalize things. I wanted to and even when I burnt that house down, I feel no remorse towards the person I was targeting. But even as I was doing it, I was very well aware that I was living vicariously through someone else's trauma. I couldn't get any justice for what happened to me, so I was going to get quote unquote justice for somebody else. Incidentally, the thing that I regret the most is that the victim, she didn't want me to do that. So that's the thing that's regrettable. I did not help her trauma, so I don't recommend anybody else follow the same path. But that's where my mind was at the time. And so ever since I was a teenager, I'd been thinking about this scene in my head, and the scene was it's this happy-go-lucky kind, quiet human being, and he's trying to make the world a better place, and he's volunteering in this soup kitchen, because he's there, he really feels this sense of injustice in the world, and he wants to help people, and so he's volunteering his time to feed the hungry, and and it shows him interacting with people. He's a bit socially awkward, but he's very well-meaning, and he's very kind. And then as he's walking home, somebody attempts to mug him, and without even thinking twice about it, he kills this person. And but the thing that's really the thing that I was trying to hammer home that was that it doesn't impact him at all. He's it shows these two sides of him, that first of all, he's very sweet and cares about things, but then he's so desensitized to violence that he somebody tries to mug him and he just kills this person without thinking, and then goes about his business like nothing's happened, because that's how desensitized he is to violence. And so that was the scene I was setting, was that this is you don't, I mean, I suppose I've given away the first chapter, not that it's you can download the first two chapters for free off the internet, but for someone who hasn't read the book at all, it was just you don't really see it coming. You're where is this chapter going? It's the things just got real fast, and yeah, so that was that's what it was always in my head, just that's how you could kind of transition from being like this person who everybody likes, even though they're a bit awkward, to someone who kills and who clearly has done this before and is and doesn't really think twice about it. Yeah.
You mentioned that you've always loved reading. Was there elements of different books that you grew up as a kid reading that sort of seeped into that whole vision of a opening to a movie or opening to a book, or was there perhaps like personal elements? You obviously mentioned the idea of vengeance and or desensitization to violence. Was it completely just something that sprung to mind? To where did the actual idea come from, do you think?
I mean, people who know me, they the main character in the novel, Jason, I mean, I took myself as like a base template and I just exaggerated the hell out of everything. Like even like the abuse that happened to me as a child, I knew, obviously like I knew what the abuse was and I knew how angry that made me. And so what I kind of did with Jason is I made his abuse 10 times worse to make him because I actually wanted to kind of push him and see how how traumatized, how much trauma he could handle until he broke, because I knew how much like trauma I went through and how I handled it poorly at times, by the way. So I definitely, people who know me, who read the book, they're like, oh yeah, I can see the elements of you in this character. I mean, I think when you're writing fiction, every character you make up is either based on you or somebody you know very well, if you write about them well, at least. Those are the characters you can write about the best. But I was definitely obsessed with vigilantism as a child and a teenager and a young adult. I was obsessed with films like The Boondock Saints. If you've seen that, I was my favorite comic book character was the Punisher. In fact, I named the surname. Most of the people in my the characters in my novel, I'm like, how do I make up names? So what I would do is I would take the first name of one prisoner and the surname of another, and I just mash them together. So like everyone in the book is pretty much based on a prisoner.
Hybrid.
Yeah, but not the main character. I'm not really sure where I got the name Jason from, but I needed a surname, and so I gave him the last name Ennis, which was and Garth Ennis was a author of he wrote a few seasons of The Punisher, the comic book. He also wrote The Boys, which has been turned into that TV series.
Great
now.
TV show, yeah.
Yeah, but so I named the character after him just because I was just obsessed with the concept of the Punisher as a child, like just someone who saw injustice in the world and wanted to equalize things, and so I did probably drew from a few different not just books but comic books and movies, like a few different like vigilante things. Somebody actually the first person who I got a manuscript assessment for the book when it was still in a draft stage, and the manuscript assessor said to me, he's like, Damien, have you ever read or seen Dexter? And I said no, and he said, make sure you don't read or watch it until your novel comes out, otherwise
interesting.
You'll get too many ideas, because I see a lot of similarities between your character and Dexter. And I mean, I know generally what the premise of the show Dexter is, and I mean, there's the vigilante justice thing, so I still occasionally get that question, like, is this did you get inspiration from Dexter? I'm like, no, not at all. Like, if anything, if I got inspiration from somewhere, it was Frank Castle, the Punisher, but definitely got, but a lot of it was based on, so I had this idea in my head, as I mentioned, since I was a teenager. I'm really glad I didn't write it as a teenager, because when I actually wrote the book, because I drew from a lot of things that had really happened, like more like, not so much actions, but like things people had told me. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to flesh out a lot of characters. So I drew from not so much none of the crimes, but I drew from a lot of real experiences. I'll tell you one. There's a scene in the book where Jason follows a pedophile who's reporting for bail, and he follows him in in the police station, and he and he he's a vigilante, probably not giving away too much. He murders him eventually.
I was going to say, he didn't take him out for lunch.
Yeah, exactly. But how I got the idea for that was actually, so I was arrested and they released me on bail, and I was reporting for bail, and I went to report, and obviously I read the newspaper as well. So, and there'd been there was a former primary school teacher. I think it was actually an assistant principal at a school in the town I was living with, had recently been charged with many child sex offences.
Oh dear.
And then I went to report for bail at the police station, and this person who I'd been reading about in the newspaper for weeks, he was standing in front of me to report for bail. And I swear I have never come so close in my life to punching someone in the back of the head. And the thing was, I think the police, obviously they would have arrested me, but I'm pretty sure the police wouldn't have actually cared. They would have been like, well, we got you on camera in our police station punching you in the guy in the back of the head. But I remember having this just this visceral feeling oh God, I'm in the same queue as this guy. And then I ended up taking that and turning it into a scene in the book, which was obviously dramatically fictionalized. But I drew from a lot of things that actually really happened, and then I just exaggerated the hell out of them. Yeah.
Well, so you can definitely guarantee a lot of emotions, in the story for readers. That's for sure. And isn't it funny, really, when to sort of wrap things all around very briefly, this whole idea of society looking down its nose to elements of crime and criminals, etc. And we're talking about vigilantism and vengeance and these sorts of themes. Now, the irony is, to do something along those lines gets you incarcerated, and therefore possibly put you in a position where society looks down its nose at you, because of course it doesn't take the opportunity to perhaps read the destination that got to the journey that got to the destination. And yet, if you put it in a story form, it'll make millions or hundreds of millions or billions. It's a whole industry, which goes to a little bit to there's a part within us all that I guess we can definitely relate to that particular emotion or that need, that requirement. Isn't it funny that to do it is one thing, we may consider it awful to a certain degree, as far as just a blanket sort of without looking into the details, and yet as an industry it'll make you a rich person.
I definitely feel like there's obviously this absolute public fascination with crime. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, and also with the prison system as well. There's a public fascination with the prison system, partially because it's an unknown. And speaking from experience, if anyone's facing prison themselves, the first advice I give them is forget everything you've seen in the movies. It's not like that at all. But there's definitely this public fascination, and I deliberately tried to write Jason as a character to be not so much likable, but I wanted people to be able to empathize with why he was the way he was, and I wanted people to identify with him. And so they would have they could kind of understand where it was coming from and things. And I actually had one person tell me and at the time I wasn't really sure how to take this, but somebody told me that they read my book and they were like, oh, I just identified with Jason so much. I'm like, yeah, why aren't there people who do this? And for about 2 weeks after this, everywhere I was going, I was just walking around being angry, seeing people doing wrong things and wanting to punish them. And I hope I'm not, don't inspire. That's not what I was going for. But I was like, that was some interesting feedback I got. I'm like, well, at least my character had you identified emotionally with my character. He had an impact on you.
And that's it. You're tapping into perhaps as Jung might have said, an archetype, or at least a theme that could be associated with different archetypes. And like you mentioned earlier, talking about the opening Scarred, how it may have been inspired by certain different aspects of literature, stories, The Punisher, etc. And that's exactly part of the process, isn't it? When you are dipping into a creative world that is so loved, shared, and experienced, of course you're going to have elements that people can recognise, because that's what makes it such a so attractive, I guess. People wanting to explore that extreme element of somebody's desires or reactions, and I guess at the end of the day, it's something that we all want to maybe try on for a little bit without the repercussions, the real world repercussions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's it was actually interesting, like writing a novel by hand was difficult. It was funny, like people are like, oh wow, I can't believe it only took you 5 months. I'm like, ironically, if I had had access to if I hadn't been in prison, I never would have written it. But if I had access to a computer in prison, I'm pretty sure I could have written it in 3 months or less. There was this process of like, I had to, like, if I didn't like a chapter, I couldn't just edit it. I had to like physically write it all again, and I actually had to write every chapter twice because I was really worried something would happen, like to the one copy in my cell. I've not only have I read Misery by Stephen King, I've seen the film adaptation. I know what happens when you only have one copy of your manuscript.
Yes.
And so I
something
wrote
to keep you up at night.
Yeah. And so I wrote every chapter twice, and then I posted a copy to a friend. But I was really paranoid the whole time. I had anxiety because my book was about violence, and you're not allowed to do anything like that in prison. So if the prison guards had found it, they would have confiscated it. So I had to spend my sentence hiding it. And how I did that was I was also keeping a journal, and I kept the manuscript between the journal. So if the guards picked it up and they read through the first pages, they're like, oh, he's writing a journal. It's just paper. And I didn't cause any trouble, so they only really did perfunctory searches of my cell anyway, and so it worked. But yeah, I thought this was actually a really healthy way for me to to like kind of process I guess one of the key themes of Scarred is like the downward spiral of revenge, why revenge isn't a good idea. This is where it takes you. And so I thought it was actually really healthy for me to explore that. But ironically, because the book contained violence, if the prison had known I was writing it, they would have confiscated it. I had to hide that I was doing something constructive, with my sentence.
Well, you could have always said you were just doing a modern day summary of different aspects of the Bible. I think these vengeance, violence.
Literally, the most violent book I've ever read is the Bible.
Oh yes, yeah. But well, look, let's try and link the Scarred to obviously the book that we really want to talk. I really want to talk about. The listeners really want to hear about, and that is your biography, Raw. So the bridge there. What I'd like to know is that, looking back now and also at the time of writing Scarred, what sort of interesting tools, I guess, writing tools, approaches, all those little nitbits that come from writing, what did you learn that you were really surprised when you look back now that you think was also an absolute necessity for Raw to have been able to take shape or come into existence? Were there elements of writing or to the approach you take to writing that were formed during writing Scarred that you think, that were fundamental building blocks of approaching Raw, or do you think there were just elements that you just sharpened a little bit better, during that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to an extent, it was a very, like, going from writing a fiction book to a memoir was a very different writing process. For example, like,
no doubt.
Yeah, like with the fiction, obviously I'm making everything up. Whereas, there were parts with the memoir where I couldn't continue writing because I wanted to write it in chronological order, but I kept having to. There were obviously like things in my childhood that I don't remember perfectly, and especially stuff when I was like under the age of 5. And so I applied for a lot of documents through Freedom of Information, and I had to like my entire docs file, and I had to wait for that to turn up and stuff. So there was a very different writing process. But I mean, something that I learnt with the first book absolutely was that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Like how do you write a whole novel in 5 months? Well, you write every day. That's how you do it. If you write 500 words every day, you'll be finished before you know it. And consistency is king. So when I approached the novel, I didn't know what I was doing essentially. But when I approached the memoir, I didn't find it daunting to write something large again, because I knew that if I just did a little every day, obviously when I had the data to work with, that it would be done. there were it was more things with publishing that helped. Like I made mistakes with the first book that I rectified with the second. But yeah, I kind of learned baptism by fire, like how to go around like editing, marketing, and publishing a book. But I think that the main thing was that I learned was just if as long as you're consistent, you'll get it done. The reason, the catalyst for writing Raw, because I didn't know, I wasn't sure even when Scarred came out, I wasn't really sure if I'd ever write a book again. And, but I kept getting, I got called, like these groups kept reaching out to me and asking, like, oh, we heard you wrote a book in Prisoner. Can you be our monthly guest speaker? And I'm like, sure, I'll try anything once. And then I did this like guest talk, and then like they were like, oh wow, that was really, you've got such an incredible story. And then they recommended me to some other group, and then before I knew it, I'd been booked for like 10 public speaking appearances. And everyone kept telling me, like, Damien, your novel sounds interesting. And I mean, Scarred is a very competent crime novel. If you like crime, you will enjoy the book. But everyone kept telling me, they're like, Damien, okay, Scarred sounds interesting, but what's really interesting is the story behind the story, is your story. And so people kept telling me, like, you've got to write a memoir. I want to hear more about your story. And so that was, eventually I was like, enough people said that to me, like, well, maybe they're onto something, so that was the catalyst for starting to write the memoir. Yeah.
I guess, this whole idea of, biting it, one piece at a time, as you mentioned, and, the story behind the story, was it a big jump? I mean, I think, me sitting here listening to what you're talking to me about, it's super fascinating. And the first thing that comes to my mind when I'm trying to, as you're talking, I'm trying to imagine myself sitting in a prison cell, writing by hand, definitely I completely understand the rush and the excitement of having that vision of an opening to a movie or a book and getting that down. But that's such a big leap from there to pulling the curtain back on elements of yourself, your life, and those things that have helped form who you are for, and put yourself, basically put you in positions that you may or may not have appreciated in life. That's a lot different to trying to really entertain somebody and a readership, including yourself, by exploring excellent crime stories and a bit of action or a thriller, or, like you said, turning up the volume to 10 on someone's emotional responses to the world around them based on their experiences. There's a big difference between that and, being, raw, revealing these really, personal attributes and stories. Was that something that when you started hearing the interest in delving into the story behind the story, was that ever a thought in your mind? Was it ever a case of, oh, that does sound good and I would like to do that, but it's I'm a little bit hesitant for whatever reason, etc.? Or was that something that didn't really come to the forefront at all because the process was just a natural sort of progression for you as an artist? So it wasn't daunting to start with. Like, I wasn't like, oh, like I'm gonna write a memoir, but this is gonna be an emotional roller coaster. So the prospect didn't scare me off, but I actually it became heavy pretty fast. And one of the reasons was if you read Raw, as you'll learn, I had a very interesting childhood. One thing, so my mother lost custody of me because my father fabricated allegations that she was abusing me as a manipulative ploy to get custody. And so there was there's this protracted 9-year custody battle between my parents. And I dealt with that so much as a child that I tried to bury that as well, for lack of a better word. And I never kind of looked into it too much. And when I started writing the memoir, it occurred to me, I didn't really know the entire story of what happened. I had a very good idea, but I wasn't exactly sure how it went down and the mechanics and logistics of everything. And so, which is again why I had to apply for my docs file through Freedom of Information. And so my father died when I was 20 years old. That was in 2006. And so he's been gone for a long time now. And so I got these documents from Freedom of Information, and that was for the first time that I learned the full extent of exactly what he'd done and how manipulative he had been and how he, pretty much upended my life. And
I went through this period where and even my friends were commenting, they're like, Damien, are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm mad because I'm angry with my father and he's dead and I can't do anything about it. Yeah. And so there was this overall, like by the time I finished, like the memoir was cathartic overall, but I went through this huge funk where I'm like, oh God, this has made me mad now. You know, like at the time I was like, oh geez, I liked my life better when I didn't know this. But yeah, so there was that. There was also there were things that were difficult. Like it wasn't actually difficult for me to write about, for example, being abused as a child because I didn't do anything wrong. You know, there's nothing to like being like a victim, survivor, whichever term serves you, suits you better, of abuse, is nothing to be ashamed about. You haven't done anything wrong. You didn't lead anybody on. Somebody made a choice to hurt you. So that wasn't difficult to write about. I found a couple of things very difficult to write about. Some, very poor choices I made as a teenager, and also again, writing about how I really regret committing this crime against this perpetrator, the one I went to prison for, that I really regret, like the fact that this did not help the victim. You know, I made her trauma worse by ignoring what she wanted and taking the law into my own hands because I was, vicariously seeking justice for myself. So there were definitely parts that were very difficult to write about. Whereas with Scarred, there wasn't. It was fiction. Like I did draw for some real things that happened, but there was a level of emotional removal from that. Whereas with the memoir, like no, this is real. And I'm pretty sure. I decided on the title for Scarred about halfway through. Like it was just like untitled fiction novel, and then about halfway through, it just the theme of scars just kept coming back, and so I'm like, oh yes, that's it. But it wasn't until I think I'd maybe like right towards finishing the end of the first draft. Like of Raw that I chose that I didn't know what I was going to call it, and I kept going through all these names, and none of them were working. I hated all of them, and then eventually I settled on Raw because it was the raw truth of what happened. Like even the things that I was embarrassed to put out there. All of my failures. I'm not trying to sugarcoat this and make myself look better, which would have been very easy. So yeah, this is what happened. This is this is everything. No, I was going to say you need to know about it, you don't need to know, but this is everything about me. This is my life. Like the good and the bad, take it or leave it. And so something that actually became apparent is like no, all those things I was embarrassed about. Nobody cares because nobody's like judged me or told me at least. They're like, I can't believe you did that. Because once when you put it all in context, you can see like why these things happen. Again, going back to the why of the crimes. It's actually quite easy to understand, even for myself. Like these things I'm ashamed of as a teenager. Like it's very easy to understand how I got there. So I mean, it was. There definitely were some parts. In fact, I don't know. I still don't really know why. But as you're reading the book, there was I got attacked when I was in the street when I was living in Ireland. I was there on a working visa, and long story short, somebody smashed a bottle over my head. And I don't know why, because of all the things that happened to me in my life, of all the bad things, that I wouldn't even put that in the top 10 bad things that have happened to me. I'm like, yeah, somebody glassed me, okay. I don't know. Like that was the last thing I wrote in the book, and I kind of I for some reason I couldn't write about that. It was too painful and hard, and even I actually wrote kind of like a placeholder into the first draft. I'm like, I'll write what actually happened later, but then I just want to put this placeholder here. And for some reason that was the hardest thing to write, but there were definitely parts that were harder to write than others for sure. Yeah.
When it comes to Raw, there was a review, a particular sentence in one of the reviews which I found really fascinating, and basically the sentence was, Raw was reminiscent of Tim Winton's and Marcus Suzak's stark and simple depiction of the Australian cultural landscape. Hard to capture and beautifully depicted. And I thought that last part, hard to capture and beautifully depicted, really goes a long way to, my initial, I guess, interpretation or response to your book. I'm not quite finished it yet, but definitely, knee deep in it. And I think, that was one of the big things that came through on the reading, and that is, it made me sort of go back in time and remember, when we were a kid, how much the whole world is, governed by the adult world, which is, our level of protection, our tap that eventually allows us to gain knowledge, all those different things. But most importantly of all, that boundary that the adult world is supposed to keep the monsters out. But what happens when these monsters are real? What happens if the people who are supposed to keep out the monsters are the monsters themselves? And, looking back, is it a case that, it's something that was hard to capture, but was a beautiful thing to depict in the sense of being able to look back with a different viewpoint. So I guess my question there in that long-winded thing is, what does that term from that reviewer mean to you? Hard to capture and beautifully depicted. Do you think that's a fair, description of the way you've written and what you've achieved with your work? And do you think it's fair to say that, on a different level, is there a way we can look back at even the most horrible things and terrifying things, and with a new sense of knowledge, can we, I guess, use the Stoic idea of changing the way we deal with, respond to things outside of our control? Is there a way to take terrible things and make them beautiful?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really lovely review. In fact, that doesn't ring any bells. Can you tell me where you found that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was on one of the Amazon reviews.
Oh, there you go. I haven't seen that one.
There we are.
Yeah, I'll have to go. I'm not a person who Googles myself often, but I'll have to go and have a look at that. But it was actually interesting. That reminds me of one thing. With Scarred, one of the underlying themes was was dysfunctional fathers, and I tried to be really subtle. I hate kind of like preaching of anything, and so I tried to be really subtle. And one of the themes was these toxic masculinity and dysfunctional fathers. And I remember I was reading an Amazon review of Scarred one day, and somebody wrote this really great review about of that theme, and I'm like, oh, finally somebody picked it up, So it's really good. But I definitely think you so like I said, the the writing about the abuse as a child wasn't particularly difficult, and for me at least, and everyone's experience is different. I gave a talk at the Newcastle Writers Festival the year before last, I think it was, and somebody asked me would you recommend writing a memoir as a form of catharsis, as a cathartic activity, and I mentioned that thing about how I went through that wave where I became a much angrier, but it was cathartic overall. But that was my experience. I read a lot of memoirs, and if you're going to write a memoir, the best advice I can give you is you need to read other people's memoirs. Obviously you're not going to copy them because it's their life, but you'll get understandings of how to frame things. And I read Alan Davies' memoir, Just Ignore Him, and something that which was brilliant, and but something that really stuck with me with that is that I read him talking about it later, and he said it was a horrible experience. He said it wasn't cathartic at all, and I'm like, thankfully my experience was different. That there's maybe a sense of even reclaiming power, because I wrote and I did read one review of I've read a few reviews, but I remember reading one review of Raw about someone saying, Damien talks about the abuse but never paints himself as a victim. It's never oh poor me, give me a sympathy because this happened. I try, even though it's some of these horrible stories, I tried it very hard, and I think I succeeded at this, to tell it in a way that was engaging and was still somebody sent me a message one day. They're like, is it bad that I'm finding this entertaining? I'm like, no, that was my goal, because he's like, I'm feeling guilty, I'm reading about this abuse, but it's fascinating, and is there something wrong with me? I'm like, well, I did, that was the goal, so I don't think so. You're allowed to read something and enjoy the writing and the story and things. So for me, I think I've never even really sat down and thought specifically about this, but now that you mention it, being able to frame what happened to me in a way that's engaging and readable, and isn't just woe is me, but it's just telling the truth of what happened in a way that people can engage with. I do think there was a sense of reclaimed power in that. It does take a lot of vulnerability to be able to do that, though. When I had a manuscript assessment for the memoir as well. Incidentally, if you're wanting to write, I cannot recommend manuscript assessments enough. They're like $500-$600 or something. It's worth every cent just to get this outside perspective once your first draft is finished. But something that was said, my manuscript assessor for Raw said to me, he's like, Damien, you need to mention less violence in your childhood. The first time your father assaults you, it's confronting, and the second time you write about it, it's still confronting but less so. And the third time you write about it, it's a little bit like, yeah, I've heard this before. And then the fourth time, it's starting to get boring. And
that's a really interesting take.
Yeah, but the thing was, I can see people getting that feedback and being outraged, like, how dare you, this is what happened to me. But he was right. He was absolutely, like, as a person who's a prolific reader, like, from a reading perspective, he was absolutely right. And so he's like, Damien, mention mention it once or twice, and then just allude to it happening again. Let the reader form their own picture of what happens next, which is what I tried to do. But I think, in order to write something like this, you need to what's the word I'm looking for? Like, there needs to be a level of confidence and at being at peace with things, because I mentioned that to someone and their mouth dropped open. Like, the assessor said that to you, and I'm like, well, no, I took it well. I have autism. I'm a very logical person, so I took that feedback very well. But I was talking to another writer about it, and she's like, oh, that would have sent me off the edge, telling me, like, write less about the abuse. It's boring. You're boring me with your stories of abuse. But
did you automatically think that was going to be something that could be beneficial to your craft, to the story, or not the story, the biography you were putting together? Was it something that you went back and forth on, or do you think that the whole idea of something becoming boring, in this instance, violence being perpetrated against yourself, do you think that the fact that it becomes boring, that in itself is a huge theme?
I never really thought about it like that. I will. I think it's just like, as a general, like, writing skill, like, that whole like show don't tell, like, you can show like a childhood like had a lot of violence in it without repeatedly mentioning the violence, so I think that's a skill in itself. I mean, one of the other things I did, so I wasn't really sure how to approach the memoir. So what I did was I wrote my entire life in chronological order. Like, this happened, then this happened, and so on and so forth. And the first draft was 160,000 words. The published version is 83.
It's a lot of editing.
Yes, and I wrote the first draft, and I was well aware it was. I probably wasn't aware of how, like, oversized it was, but I was aware it was oversized. But I sent it to the manuscript assessor, and I said, "Can you give me advice on what you would do with this?" And the advice was really good. He said, "This is really interesting, Damien, because at no point, and I trust this person, like, to be, I like to not just like stroke my ego, like, they'd been very blunt with me about things, like, example, like, the violence is getting boring. But he said, at no point overall is this boring, but this is too long, and you need to focus on themes. You need to isolate some, instead of just writing about everything, isolate some themes and write about those, which is what I did. A lot people ask me if I left things out. I'm like, of course I left things out, like, not because I wanted to hide them, just because, well, this story doesn't fit in. In fact, the single best thing I think I've ever written in my life was in the original draft of Raw, I had a chapter on going to basic training with the Army, which was a wonderful, not wonderful, like a very unique and interesting experience. And I wrote this, like, chapter about it, and it's just like, it was the best thing I'd ever written, and it kind of pained me to cut that out, but I had to, because it was just like a non sequitur. It's like, Damien does all these things, and, like, and there's a child abuse and overcoming trauma, and revenge and things, and then we've got this, like, but now Damien goes to the Army, and this is fun. This is a fun 3,000 chapter, and now we're going back to the main story again. It was a little bit painful to cut things like that out, but I absolutely had to focus it around themes, and I had to think about what that was, because a lot of the first draft is that I had a lot of struggles with employment in my 20s, and I do still touch on that, a decent amount in the book. But when I was actually writing it, I felt like, I had an entire chapter about basic training. I had an entire chapter about, the 6 months I worked full time in pathology, and I saw a lot of like very interesting, entertaining stories in there. But I felt like when I was writing it, like one of the main themes was crappy employment. It's like he died with a falafel in his hand is about crappy experiences in share accommodation. And so I really felt that was what I was writing, and that was something that got cut heavily, because I'm like, no, I have that all of those stories were kind of fun, but I feel like I had a deeper message to share, and and that was overcoming childhood trauma, and recovering through therapy, and the journey of recovery. So that's what I ended up shaping it around. But there was definitely a lot there to begin with that ended up getting cut.
Well, you said it's part of it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, you did say that you now consider yourself a non-fiction writer, and there's the raw, I think, introduces or declares to the world who you are, and a lot of the things that shaped who you are. And so I think there's a huge scope there for another volume which focuses on things like the army and employment, which is that whole, now the adventures of Damien, who you now know. So I'd definitely be interested in reading about your time in the army. And as someone who had way too many jobs in my 20s, I'd definitely be down with reading someone else's experiences, good and bad, through all the different employment and the horrible situations or interesting scenarios that you might find yourself in. But the big thing that I took from what you just said then was, of course, having somebody read your work and help you, I guess, maintain focus on particular themes is obviously one of the most important elements, especially when it comes to writing a biography. Trust. I want to talk to you a little bit about trust. That is a theme that jumped out to me, at least as a reader, from when you were a child, and how the breaking of that trust and the repercussions, the ripples that come from that stone throw in the pond, where, at such an age when trust is supposed to be being formed and giving you that safety blanket to give you that sense of comfort and training so that you can explore the world, stripping that away, must have huge repercussions, and obviously did in this instance. Was it a conscious theme that you were working on at some point, the element of the broken trust? And with everything that's happened, the start of a conversation, we're talking about the lack of support, when it comes to mental health and the Medicare and those sorts of rehabilitational aspects of incarceration. Has trust been rebuilt or formed since then, or do you think that that's been stolen from you and hasn't come back?
Yeah, wow, what a great question. It definitely the lack of lost trust in both my parents for different reasons, and that really impacted the rest of my life, and it still does. Honestly, I don't I don't have a lot of faith in humanity overall, and in fact, one of the reasons I'm campaigning for Medicare in prisons is because I started researching this. I'm like, this has been going on since 1973. Why hasn't anybody done and some people have briefly advocated this in this space, but no one's really done this dedicated pushing to try and make it happen. And so I I've always, like I mentioned, I've always had this issue with justice and equalizing things, and trying to get this justice, because I never got any myself, and I think I'm still doing that, just legally now. So I'm I'm like, why am I advocating for Medicare in prisons? Because nobody else is. Why did I help start up a prison magazine which provides a lot of mental health support in prison? I get letters every day from people in prison, and I constantly get told like, you have and people say like, you have no idea how much difference this has made to my sentence, you know, like to have a way to give, like, have a voice and like to feel connected. I'm like, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Paper change is what I needed when I was in prison, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, why did I do that? Well, because nobody else is doing that. Why am I advocating for Medicare in prison? Because nobody else like, you know, is. And if I've assembled a team that are helping me, so like, you know, people are helping with me, but I've been the catalyst that's driving this. And like, so I still feel like I'm, you know, trying to, you know, get this sense of justice in the world. And to be honest, it's taking its toll. It's really draining. And I hope to be able to, I have this dream that like at some point, like maybe if I get Medicare in prisons or something, like if I accomplish something big like this, I'll have felt on some kind of subconscious level that I've validated my existence enough and I can allow myself to relax. But I'm constantly driven by this like, you know, I see this injustice everywhere, and I feel like that sense of obligation to do something about it, which, you know, is also ironically, and I wouldn't do this again, but that was part of the reason why I burnt the house down. I'm like, yeah, this person needs to be punished, and the police don't have enough evidence. And if I don't do it, who else is going to? And, you know, so I feel like I've just got a much more healthy version of that now. But yeah, you know, why am I doing it? Because I don't have a lot of faith in, you know, that other people are going to pick up the torch if I don't. So, you know, which is a little bit sad. And, you know, I'm probably a little, you know, based on like my childhood trauma and stuff, I'm probably, I know I'm probably a bit too pessimistic, but I mean, that's just, you know, what's shaped me. And I mean, it's what's driving me as well. So it's not all bad, but yeah, that's definitely something that I feel like, you know, impacts me, and this all links back to just not getting the justice and support I needed as a child. And so now I'm, you know, I think we're all compensating for things that happened to us when we were young to an extent, even on a small, like really small level. But yeah, that's where it comes from. That's where my drive comes from. And you know, somebody like, you know, I don't think I'd change anything about my life, because I'm aside from being overworked, I'm quite happy with my life these days. You know, my 20s were kind of miserable, but I'm really happy. You know, like aside from being stressed with work all the time, like I'm happy with what I'm accomplished, and I'm happy with where the direction my life's going in now. And so, and I wouldn't have that if I don't think if I hadn't have had the pain, you know, like no offense to anyone listening, but you know, like I'd, you know, rather had the, you know, interesting traumatic life that I've had that's led me to where I am now, where, you know, I have this incredible job. I'm the editor of a art and writing magazine for people in prison. Nobody else in Australia has that job title. You know, it's fascinating. I love it. I get the most incredible letters from jail, people in prison all over the world, and it's just the most incredible job. And you know, if I yeah, like no offense to people who work in admin, but I would, like, you know, if I had a normal, like, sheltered life, you know, white picket fence, maybe I'd just be doing something a bit more mundane, whereas I quite love my life now, you know.
Well, you know, I don't think it's a matter of disrespect at all. I think, you know, that's the whole concept of everybody's journey being so different. But I think you said you've lost a lot of faith, or you don't have a lot of faith in the system, and I'm probably in that same, I've got my foot in the same river as you in that respect. And I also think that the words trust and faith are very interconnectable, if not maybe skins for the same, you know, features underneath. You know, I asked the reason why I asked if trust was a conscious theme or not, and the lack of trust, and whether you'd regained it, because one of the reasons, the motivations for that question was I can't help but feel, you know, I look back in a lot of areas in my life where I've lost trust, especially as a kid, and I think they have also, whether it was a conscious thing at the time or not, but definitely as I look back now and how that, you know, like you said, how it affects us in our quote unquote adult lives, it can be such a huge motivator, you know, this lack of trust, because somebody who's in a situation where they haven't experienced a lack of trust, well, of course, what's the first thing they do? They just have an automatic trust of a system, and maybe that's half the problem. By trusting a system that maybe doesn't deserve that level of trust immediately, or at least uncritiqued trust, that's sort of where a lot of the problems lie, is this sort of just natural assumption that we can trust something. Talking about trust, but also I'd like to ask you, not just whether anything has restored trust, or whether you've just accepted the repercussions that came from the breakthrough trust, but also peace. Has part of writing or all the experiences that have happened since a lot of the events that have led to your incarceration and a lot of the different pathways your life's taken, do you think that you've discovered ways to make quote unquote peace, can you make peace with something without having trust restored, do you think, or faith restored?
I definitely, and this is something I kind of conclude on in the memoirs, that I feel like you can get peace, but when you've been through trauma, you can definitely reach a level of peace, but only to an upper limit. And so I feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm probably probably not like peaked, but I feel like I'm very close to as good as things gonna get. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. I'm always going to, I'm always going to have that. There's always going to be triggers, and there's always going to be challenging. And there are things that are mundane for other people that are always going to be challenging for me. But I feel like I've reached a level of peace where I'm better than I've ever have been, and I'm happier than I ever have been. And I do owe a lot of that to talking and writing. For between 8 and 28, and 28 was when I committed the crime. I think I'd only told about 4 people I'd been abused, and even then in no great detail. It just felt like this burden I was carrying that I had to deal with myself. And just earlier this month, I was actually booked to give a talk at a festival here in Newcastle, and I got up on stage and I told a crowd of at least 150 strangers that I had been sexually assaulted as a child, and that wasn't even a little bit difficult, and why should it be? I didn't do anything wrong. But so I've definitely progressed from this person who was carrying this weight around my neck to someone who can get up and talk. And part of the reason I do that, and part of the reason I wrote Raw, was because I wanted to, I didn't start getting better until I started talking about things. And I really feel, and I don't think my book's going to change the world, but I really feel like certain people are going to read it, and it's going to motivate them to to come forward and talk and maybe heal themselves, because that's been my healing journey. I owe it to a combination of writing and speaking, and just being honest and accepting what happened, and sharing my story. And I hope sharing my story motivates other people to talk about theirs. And when I say talk, it doesn't have to be with a psychologist. You just you should find someone you trust and talk, because burden shared is a burden halved, and all that. You can't. Even when I grew up as a child, my father had that toxic masculinity. If I cried, I was told I was just stop acting like a woman. Your men bottled things up, and we don't talk about our emotions. And I'm like, well, no, that's toxic masculinity, and positive masculinity is we do talk about this, and we share and we support each other. And so that's something that I'm really trying to go with, and that's something that motivates me to keep talking about it. Really, I hope I can, again, be the change you want to see in the world. I can't change the world, but I can change it for some people. And people come up to me after talks and say, thank you, that really helped. And I found that really inspiring, and that's what keeps me going with things like that, I think. Yeah.
We say that you don't feel your book's going to change the world, but I think that goes back to that concept of how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. I think for every person that reads the book, Raw, there's very much the opportunity and possibility that you're going to change that person's life. So, and of course, change enough lives, then maybe those changes start happening in the world. One of the things that I found really honest about your betrayal, when you're looking back at your life growing up, I think, is you really captured that idea of, it wasn't necessarily an examination of what happened as seen through the eyes of an adult. It's, I think you really did capture that lens as through the eyes of a child, in the sense of there's just the confusion. And I think that's a big thing too. We as adults, we always want to have a reason, or we want to have an answer to something, and until we obtain that answer, or we find a reason, or we can tie a bow on it, then it's unresolved to a certain degree. But I think something, stories like yourself in Raw, and the way you approach what is a difficult subject, I think it's a really important thing for readers out there, and for people in general, in the sense that it's okay to remember and realise that back, as we're growing up, a lot of times there is no answer. There was no answer to be found then, and that and just because whether or not there's an answer to be found now doesn't matter. Does that make a little bit of sense? I think you really, for me, you captured that whole idea that sometimes there's just confusion and the world doesn't make sense, and that's what it is to be a child, and a lot of the pain that we can have comes from trying to change that, from it, let time and distance and our different intellectual capabilities and emotional capabilities somehow go back and fix that idea of confusion, when the reality is sometimes the confusion, it just is, and that it's its own thing, and it is complete in its incompleteness.
No, absolutely. And I feel like it is important to accept that it's not possible to get closure over everything, and that's okay. Obviously some things are going to hurt more than others, but I'll never get the closure that that I was talking about, where I can't confront my father and just tell him how mad I am, and that took some getting used to, but I mean, I've made peace with that, and that's the thing, everything's not ever gonna fit in this nice little package that we can put a bow on, but I think it just acceptance that that these and that's at the end of my memoir, this is okay, I've found as much peace as I'm probably going to anytime soon, and and that this is okay, so I think it's kind of unhealthy to idolize these kind of perfect life, whereas it's just accepting that there's always going to be some confusion. I've got understandings of why my father did certain things, but I don't know exactly, and it obviously it's honestly it's some of it's not that important now. It happened, and I've accepted it, and I think acceptance and just trying to make peace with things as much as you can is really important.
Yeah. And how inspiring has Raw been for a lot of people? And I asked that question with a bit of an emphasis or a focus on you obviously have a rich vein and a great relationship with people that are incarcerated, and you're giving them an absolutely astounding opportunity to have a voice and to express themselves through art, through creativity, and just being able to voice whatever's inside their soul and their hearts and their minds. How inspiring has it been for people, and do you think that you've helped open up people's ability, and especially people that are incarcerated? And you did talk about masculine, the negative aspects of masculinity in the sense of where we bottle things up and stuff. Do you think it's given people the courage to open up and maybe have a look at their past lives in that way? Because I know that growing up, when I was in my 20s and teenage years, there was a lot of, I'm too tough to read, I'm too, all that sort of stuff. And I can imagine that that's kind of, and again, I can only imagine because I haven't been there. So, I do apologise if I'm making an assumption, but I imagine that that's a little bit magnified inside prisons. Do you think you've helped? I've no doubt you have, but have you had some, direct feedback? Are you seeing it, Are you seeing some people or finding people, taking these, really powerful steps in their lives that they might not have taken if they had not been introduced to the world of, being able to write and bring your life to life, should I say, on the page?
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely like, I get people coming up to me after talks, and people sending me messages like, telling me how inspiring they found my book, and so I mean, but most people don't do that. So like, I'm like, sometimes I wonder. Like, in fact, a fun fact, I have like. I don't get the any like sales in real time. Like I'm going to get my first royalties check at the 12-month mark of my book being out, and at this point I literally don't know if I've sold 100 or 5,000 copies. I don't know.
Well, hopefully 500,000.
Yeah. But so one thing that I will say is that I get letters like every week from people telling me in prison like how much. This is like Prison Magazine, this is a great idea, like, oh, why hasn't anybody else done this? Other people have done it, it's just been a long time, and they're like, oh, I think this has motivated me to write again. I'm drawing, I'm sharing things with my kids, and and so people tell me this all the time. However, I'm also very aware that, like, as someone who's been in prison myself, it's my target audience is prisoners, but my target audience essentially is prisoners who want to read and write and make art. There are so many people in prison who will just never read my magazine because they're not interested. There were two things that were really depressing in prison. One was the lack of constructive things they gave us to do, and the other depressing thing was the fact that even if there were really great constructive things to do in prison, half the people in there wouldn't do them because they've had attitudes which are probably shaped on their childhood. If you've been told you're a failure all your life, and you failed at school, and you eventually you stop having any faith in the system. So it's you can still understand why people got there, but there's definitely I know there are absolutely people in prison who will never read my magazine because it's a magazine, and that's life. But I mean, I'm very happy reaching out to the or providing support for the people who want it, and I know it's funny, I actually get more feedback. I get so much feedback for the magazine because I mean, people in prison have a lot of free time, and they especially the people who like to write, they like to write letters. So I get a lot of letters. I get a lot of very long letters, from people in prison, like telling me how much my magazine means to them. By comparison, actually Today I got a message on Instagram from someone telling me how much they love my book, but it's like a 50-word message, if that. Whereas people in prison will write me a 6-page letter. So I think as those of us in the community, we've got a lot less time. Even though we're all supposedly connected on social media, but are we actually talking to each other?
Well, this is definitely true, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, I get a lot of feedback from people in prison. But yeah, it's sometimes like I said, because I don't know how many copies of my. I've sold several hundred copies of my book myself, like giving talks and things. But yeah, because I don't know how much impact it's having. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I got a message from a friend in Tasmania. And she just, she's like, "Oh, your book's for sale in a bookstore here," and I'm like, "Really?" Because I don't really I don't get data on what stores are ordering it about either. So I don't have the greatest understanding of how what impact it's making. But I do get, when I give talks and stuff, I do get really great feedback, and that really absolutely keeps me motivated.
Excellent. I mean, is there opportunities? Have you had opportunities, or are you hoping to have opportunities to offer some sort of face-to-face talks, classes, workshops, etc. in the prison system, or is that something that you have to do remotely?
Oh no, I actually do have what's called a jail pass, an authority to enter New South Wales prisons. I've gone into prisons twice now. To assist with other things. One was actually the same organisation that employs me to make the Prison Magazine now. They run a program called Jailbreak Radio, and so I went in to help them record an episode of that at Shortland Correctional Centre. Was that earlier this year? I can't remember. But I am quite open to that. I turned down a offer to teach art in prison earlier this year, just because with the PhD and everything, I'm doing too much. Yeah. I'm spread myself too thin. In fact, one thing that I did do a bit of a book tour. I went and I did about I did a good half a dozen talks and in person about my memoir, and like another half a dozen podcasts and stuff. But I mean, I wish I had had more time to go on a real dedicated tour and do some massive promotion, but it's just, I've got my fingers in so many pies that it's hard to do that. But yeah, I there's so much potential. Like, I spent my 20s getting fired from jobs I didn't want to apply for in the first place because I knew I was going to hate them. I'm spending my 30s turning down work offers, which is not perfect either, but it's much better, so yeah, there's a lot of I can see myself I would like to do that, teaching in prisons. I've just there's with everything going on at the moment, there's not a lot of room left for other things, but that's something that absolutely falls within the bell curve of things I'd enjoy doing.
So essentially, what you're saying is you need to clone about 4 or 5 Damiens.
Yes, yeah, no, that'd be so. Like, there's that saying, I can do anything, but I can't do everything, and I sometimes have to remind myself of that, and I turn down things all the time, like, oh, that would have been an incredible offer. I'm like, yeah, but there'll be more, and I'm doing, and I am burning myself out a little bit. I'm about to take a break from the PhD for a bit, actually, just because I need to focus on a couple of other really big things that are happening at the moment. But yeah, it's definitely there's never enough time. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a fabulous segue. Thank you for making my job so easy. But no, that's a fabulous segue to maybe letting our listeners know, what is life looking like for the next 6 months for Damien Linnane? Between the magazine, between art exhibitions, your writing, your PhD, crikey, that's a lot there. So, yeah. Any big events on the horizon, as far as any of your art stuff goes, or your business stuff goes, or your university stuff goes, or are you going to take this opportunity to, like I said, just slow down a little bit and reevaluate different methods forward? What's in the immediate future?
So the Medicare issue is taking up a lot of space.
Mm-hmm. Something
Something that's probably more of interest to the average person is back in May this year, I organised Australia's first ever international prison art exhibition. I through the magazine I get a lot of prison art, and I got heaps without even trying. And then it occurred to me, like, what if I actually tried to accumulate art from prisons all over? And I ended up getting over 100 artworks from 25 different prisons in 8 different countries, and that was the exhibition that the Governor of New South Wales, Margaret Beazley, opened, and that went really well. And I'm currently just for clarification, because my jaw dropped a little bit there, but just so in case like myself, other our listeners sort of went, huh? Did you really just say? So did you say that's the very first? Yeah, no, and so I did a lot of digging, and I talked to a lot of people in the know, and I'm very confident that nobody's ever done that in Australia before. Like, it's very uncommon to have a prison art exhibition at all, but I'm very confident that nobody's ever done an international one that's showing prison art from many countries.
That is an amazing achievement, and just represents, obviously, crikey, an amazing vision on behalf of yourself. Congratulations.
No, thank you. But that was a very big undertaking. It was actually one of several things I've done in my life where if I had known how big it was going, like how much work it was going to be when I started, I might not have done it. But I'm glad I did it. But now that I've already assembled everything, I'm currently planning on joining in with another exhibition and touring that to Brisbane in March next year, and I'm trying to line up a date in Victoria and a different one in Sydney as well. I'm not sure if they'll go ahead. It's hard to find dates that work for everyone and stuff, but so I'm putting some energy into that, and the Medicare issue, and the magazine's always there running in the background. Everyone can read that for free online. Paperchain.com, CHAINED, and there's a couple other things that also keep me busy, but in terms of things that people will be able to engage with, that's what I'm working on. Yeah.
And where do they follow yourself? What's the best place to keep up to date with all of these cool things you're doing?
Yeah, so our website's damienlinnane.com, Linnane. I'm sure my name will probably be in the podcast title or something, but
of course.
Yeah, the only social media I'm on is Instagram. You can find me at Damien Linnane, and in my bio on that, you can also find the Paper Chained Instagram and my art Instagram as well. The Paper Chained one's just paper.chained. But yeah, you can pretty much find all the links from my Instagram at Damien Linnane. That's probably the best way to keep up with what's happening. Yeah.
Wow. So from prison world to the art world, which are two very distinct worlds, I think. But, and this whole, wonderful publishing journey and your art journey, visual art journey, looking forward in the next few years, or looking forward in the continued unraveling of the awesomeness that is your life, is there or are there any avenues, artistic or action or career-wise, anything that you haven't yet dipped your toes in, that you're, in the back of your mind thinking, one day I might have a crack at that?
Well, I know my next book is going to be on the history of prison magazines, which is also a focus of my PhD. So that's something I'd like to do in the not too distant future, because no one's ever researched that either.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, because somebody else started up Paper Chained, but I've been with her since pretty much day one, and then she quit in 2021, and I took over. But I was like, we can't be the first people who thought this was a good idea, and so I started digging, and turns out we weren't by a long shot. But no one's ever researched the history of prison magazines before, so that's just I was like, yeah, this is just kind of slipped through the cracks, and I want to be the first person to write about that. So that's probably something big on the horizon. Other than that, to be honest, like, when I was in my 20s, I had like all these like, oh, this is my 5-year plan, and none of them ever worked out. And I actually like I attribute a lot of my success now to just putting a lot of positive energy out there and accepting what comes. Like, the most incredible things get offered to me, like that. I mentioned briefly, I illustrated a book for Penguin Random House. I didn't apply for that. They heard of me and reached out to me. So these. I get all these incredible opportunities, and I go with the ones I love the most. So I can't say. I want to finish my PhD eventually, and I want to write this book, but I can't say I have any like huge plan. Like I want to be here in 5 years. I want to keep doing what I'm doing and see where life takes me.
Well, I think that's the best goal of all, isn't it? Just seeing where life takes you. Because I'm a huge advocate for the concept that life is what happens while you make plans, and
yes, yeah.
If you're not willing to sort of hop from one bus to the next, you just may end up on a bus that you realise has only got one stop left, and then you kind of like sitting there going, well, that was great. So yeah, definitely have to be willing to just let that the flow of life take you wherever. So I think that's awesome. But it's interesting, very interesting topic that you're talking about for your next book, the history of prison magazines, and that's I think that'd be a fascinating read, especially considering what it means. The themes that you're going to be able to explore in there is just amazing. But reading a little bit about that, and having a think about things prior to our chat and meeting you, it did make me remember going back, well, quite a few years now, but our quote unquote community radio here in Adelaide, when I was growing up in Adelaide, used to have on Sunday nights. Now I'm a musician as well, and as listeners who might have listened to my interviews previously, and when I was a co-host on the show, I love my heavy metal amongst other things. But Sunday night there used to be what's called 3 hours of power, which was always a staple for my panel van days and surfing days and metal days. But also on the Sunday nights, I think it was every fortnight or maybe it was every Sunday, but nonetheless, it was a prison radio show. And it was essentially loved ones that would send in messages, letters, etc. to the radio hosts, and who would then read it on the radio for the prisoners so that they could hear and enjoy the messages of love from the people important to them. And it was always as someone who's loved writing and since far as I can remember, I have quite vivid memories actually of late at night cruising around in the panel van because with nothing better to do, but listening to that show and just a lot of the heartfelt emotions and little little personal things that they tried to get in with one or two sentences that often only the person listening would maybe get in the full context, but it made for really, really fascinating listening, and something that probably I suspect, I don't know if it's out there, but if not, it should be more of it.
Yeah, so that like I said, the organization that employs me, they make Jailbreak Radio, which airs every week. At a few different places. I'm not sure if they air in South Australia, but I know well, if you've got digital radio, you can tune in anywhere. But they go out in Melbourne and a few different places in New South Wales. I know, and there's in Queensland. There's 4ZZZ, the community radio up there. They have a station, a show called Locked In, where they do something similar. So that there is a bit of that still.
Good.
Yeah, no, it is such a really great space to share things and to help people feel connected, which is really important because you get these people who say, oh, like, oh, well, you're in prison, you're supposed to be punished. I mean, trust me, they're separated from their families, they're feeling punished. Yeah, if you've got nobody said that COVID lockdown was easy because we had TVs and radios. Okay, like even if you've got a TV in your cell, which you might not, you're still doing it hard. But I mean, and studies consistently show that the more connected you stay to your family and your community, the better success you have at rehabilitation. So I mean, even if you don't care about the rights of prisoners, which is fine, I don't want to argue with those people. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to isolate people and then expect them to rehabilitate. It's if you want to reduce crime and save money on the cost of reincarcerating people, then these things like Paper Chain and things like these radio programs, they're actually really beneficial. They save a lot of money. Yeah,
and not only that, the work you're doing, I think, to bring everything full circle is allowing stories to come through. You've gone through a lot of a big literary journey to bring the world, or bring your story to the world, both your fiction and non-fiction story, and by letting other people who are currently incarcerated bring their story to the world, I think you're also helping spotlight that real human element, the human side of things that maybe will just let us all know that none of us are immune to stepping on the other side of the law. And so like you said, whether someone agrees with it or not, that's neither here nor there. That's obviously an opinion everyone's allowed to have. However, at least form the opinion after at least dipping your toes in some stories. So, and I think if you are playing a part in letting some of these stories come to life and get a voice in the world, including your own story, then I think the world's a better place for it. So, and I'm a better person for having had the opportunity to chat with you. It's been a while since I've done an interview. It has been absolutely amazing, being able to hear so much about the different aspects of your biography and your incarceration and all those things in between. And so I just want to, Damien, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, for trusting me to have a chat to you about some of what are probably some difficult things, but also for sharing a story with the world, with the Australian book lovers listeners. And it goes without saying, I really hope, and I trust, and let's bring it back to the theme of trust. I trust that there will be nothing but continued success and whole new adventures for you. And I think, I think that's well deserved too.
No, thank you, and thanks for having me on. I've actually really enjoyed chatting. It's been great, and I enjoy sharing my story. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you to Damien and Darren. It was lovely to listen again to Darren's fabulous, the esoteric pathways that he dives down, and boy, did they cover some ground, some really important issues, as well as some really challenging, vulnerabilities that Damien shared with us. Yeah, brilliant. And he's doing some absolutely wonderful and important work.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of things I didn't know. So, but yeah, no, fantastic. And working on his PhD, which will be, I'm sure, absolutely amazing. So keep working on that. Damien, that was amazing. You can't bury trauma.
No, No,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, and he's got Paper Chain. He's an artist as well.
Yeah.
And
The magazine, the drawing. Yeah, absolutely. So very much a pantser too, by the sound of it.
Yes.
With his writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Lovely to hear Darren's dulcet tones again. So
Yes.
thanks for a fabulous interview with Damien.
Yes. Thank you, Darren.
Yes. One quick quote to finish
Yes.
us off. So I've
Let's do
got,
it.
I thought this was appropriate.
Mm.
The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. So that's from Elizabeth Gilbert.
Ooh, I like that one.
like that
I've got
one?
a good old Stephen King. When your story is ready for rewrite, and because I'm editing and rewriting at the moment, this is cut it to the bone. Yeah, I'm not very good at that. Get rid of every ounce of excess fat. This is going to hurt. Revising a story down to the bare essentials is always a little like murdering children, but it must be done. And yeah, I've definitely been working on that a lot with cutting out big chunks and rewriting and just targeting and tailoring. So I thought that was a good reminder to myself.
A good reminder. And as Damien,
Yes.
he had a couple of pieces that he had to he cut his book down by half almost.
Yeah, that's a massive amount.
Massive amounts. All right. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget you can follow us on at Australian Book Lovers in various places. If you want your book on the website, www.australianbooklovers.com/for-authors. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, Australian Book Lovers /book lovers. And
got
you
lots
can
of
be
giveaways.
Run for giveaways.
Yeah, we've got lots coming up. So
we just need to remind people about one thing, Laurie.
Yes, that's right. Two. Read.
Remember to. Oh,
yes. Sorry, I jumped in too quick. We are terrible. It's fine. We need to remember
to read more Aussie books. Lovely. Bye for now.
Let's meet again when magic happens.